And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May 2023 Capture Cast, where we're going to talk about the changes in the FAFSA and some effective strategies for college admissions and financial aid offices. I'm Chris Harris, Senior Enrollment Strategist here at Capture Higher Ed, and want to welcome everybody to our event today. But for those of you who are new to the Capture Cast, welcome. We're glad to see you here. Just a little bit about us before we get started. Capture is a leading enrollment marketing firm that believes that every interaction counts. Every email, every website page, every digital ad, every text message you send to a prospective student and their family has to be relevant and personal. Our mission is simple. We are powered by the industry's only behavioral intelligence platform. Capture's marketing solutions and our expert services help higher institutions identify, convert, and enroll more of the right students every year. We do this through the use of the behavioral intelligence platform. We have engaged marketing automation, which is going to be on display at Slate this year. We'll talk about that here in a couple minutes too, but we do this also with our apply and enroll predictive models. The industry's most accurate predictive models anyway, as we integrate machine learning with behavioral variables to inform your marketing and outreach activities to optimize your resources, because we all know we have limited resources right now. We do this through our marketing solutions, through digital advertising, email. We do some SMS marketing, obviously, print and direct mail, and search consulting as well. But I think it's the biggest, what sets us apart is our expert services. We have account and project managers, real data analysts, content creators, and digital advertisers who really take the time to listen and to know and understand what your needs are as a campus and as an institution. We have one platform. There's no need to log into 7 different places every day. You can log into our platform, the behavioral intelligence platform, and we give our clients real-time, transparent reporting every day so that you can make the right decisions about your outreach and your budgeting. So with that said, let's get started with the webinar today. So we're looking for answers to some questions, and I think these are some important questions. And earlier today and yesterday, while I was working through the presentation, I visited about 25 to 27 different websites, college websites, looking for answers like what's changing for the 2024-25 free application for admission, FAFSA. Have you guys started to talk about the changes yet for the FAFSA and what that means? How is this going to impact the financial aid process for families and campuses? Have you guys started to communicate with your prospective students, not only for 2024, but 2025 and 2026 maybe? And lastly, how can you leverage the behavioral interactions you use with your digital strategies to ensure that they're getting the right messages at the right time? Are you set up? Have you started a comm flow? Are you thinking about this? And as I look through the websites, I don't think you are. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. And maybe it's just because it's the end of May. We haven't gotten to July 1 yet, where we kind of make that move to the next year per se. But let's really talk about that. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the big changes. We've got some experts joining me today, and we're going to talk about those big changes. We have college and university considerations. What is a college or university, or should you be thinking about? We have student and family considerations, because I think as a college or university, if you're sitting in that office right now, you need to be understanding that what affects you, but it also affects those families who are looking to enroll starting in 2024. How do we help navigate these changes? How do we communicate with those people? And then we have always any thoughts and takeaways, and then we always talk about what next. So enough about me. Let's bring in our two experts, Kat Hollins and Ed Recker. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you both back to the Capture Cast, because you both have been repeat offenders here, and it is great to see you both again. Let's just get started with some introductions. Kat Hollins, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
And kick it off. All right. Well, my name is Kat, and I'm the client trainer here at Capture. I just celebrated my 1 year, actually, about a week ago. So prior to coming to Capture, I spent about a decade on the enrollment management side of institutions. So overseeing the outreach and the communications, our advisors, our admissions counselors, things like that. So now coming to Capture, I work with all of our clients to work with those teams to take all of that behavioral intelligence data and how you can use that to make those personalized connections at one-to-one with all of our prospective students. So I'm super happy that you allow me to be a repeat offender here.
Yeah, we're going to use you a lot. And I'm just telling you.
Perfect.
It's always good to have you. And Mr. Recker, always a pleasure from our friends at Sallie Mae. Ed, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ed Recker. As Chris said, I'm with Sallie Mae. My title there is Director of High School Relationship Management. I've been with Sallie Mae for about 4 years, largely just teaching and educating folks about the FAFSA, about the financial aid process, trying to help that path be a little straighter, a little smoother from that transition from high school to college or university. Prior to that, I was with Ruffalo Noel Levitz as part of their advanced financial aid solutions team. Prior to that, I was on the school side. So 2 years at the University of Findlay as a vice president for enrollment management. And then 16 years before that in the financial aid office in various roles, anywhere from a processor all the way up to director. So happy to be here, Chris. It's always good to be a repeat offender in this case.
I like the financial aid Yoda. You just
Exactly. I think that's the best thing here is that, Kat, you have a wealth of experience on the admission side, Ed, obviously on the financial aid side. And between the two of you, we're talking about, probably close to 45, 50 years. And if you add in how many years I've been on this ride of 26 years now in higher ed, you're looking at, over 75 years of experience in this process. So as we go through this process and as we talk today, I think it's important that we really bring to the forefront the need to communicate and what we're going to communicate and how we're going to do that. But first off, as we always do, and Emma, you want to bring up our poll, we like to poll the audience. So tell us how you feel right now. Have you and your teams begun preparing for the new FAFSA and how it can and will affect your recruitment and retention this coming year? Because it's not just about recruitment. Remember, you still have students on your campus that have to go through this process as well. So Emma Brown, thank you so much for popping that up for us. And I want to thank Emma while you guys are filling this out. I'd like to thank Emma for being our technical director, and then Kevin Hyde for being our content specialist as well behind the scenes in the marketing department here at Capture. So give it a couple more seconds. Ed, how do you think everybody's feeling based upon who you're talking to?
I think it varies. I think most people would probably say they still need to work on it, largely because we still have information trickling out from the Department of Ed, and I think everyone's playing a little bit of, I don't necessarily want to say catch up, but definitely trying to prep and get ready for all of these changes.
Right. And Kat, you're working with our 100 plus partners across the nation. Have you guys started to hear anything yet?
So I think a large portion is that people are kind of waiting to hear what comes next. What is that final date? So while we know that there's going to be some issues and some planning needed for 23-24, there's kind of this waiting period right now, but I think we need to get going.
Sure. Emma, go ahead and pop the results up for everybody so we can take a look. Oh, okay. So everybody's been kind of reading about it a little bit and getting through it. Seems like some folks got some work to do, but at least 3 offices have their stuff together, it looks like, to move on. So awesome. So let's get started on talking a little bit about it. And Ed, I think this is where it's really going to come into handy, and we'll kind of take these one at a time. But the EFC is gone. The notion of EFC is gone. We have this new thing called the SAI, the Student Aid Index. We're all reading about that, but how is that different now? What has kind of changed in that process?
Sure. So the very first thing, obviously, the name, and I think just changing the name will hopefully eliminate a lot of the confusion. Most folks, when they're talking about estimated family contribution, expected family contribution, they're confused because, is this what I need to pay? Is this going to change from school to school? I can't pay this. How do I do this? There's a lot of confusion just with the name and actually what it does. The shift to Student Aid Index really is meant to eliminate a lot of that confusion. The EFC was ultimately meant to be an index number that helped schools determine what types of aid, how much aid students are eligible for. just simply renaming it, I think really is going to be helpful for students and families. Now, with that being said, the formula behind it is also changing. So we do have some details on that. We don't necessarily have all of them at this point, and I think that's part of the angst that Kat had kind of mentioned, that we need a little bit more information on that before we can really dig in and move forward.
Well, you're talking about the change and formula. It's always been, every administration that comes into the White House, we're going to put more money into Pell, but then they always change the formula behind it, so it moves everything around a little bit and ends up kind of being the same at the end. But this could actually help a little bit with the expansion of the federal Pell Grant as well. Eligibility is going to be determined by family size and federal poverty levels a little bit more. So what's that really mean when they talk about expansion of the Pell Grant?
Right. So the estimate really is that it's going to broaden. It's going to make the eligibility increased for students and families. It does get complicated though, folks. I think this is one of those that's left, especially even aid administrators, waiting to see more. So in the past, you had a really simple Pell table where it was a grid where this is the EFC, this is the Pell. If you felt boom right there, that's how much you got. Now the Pell Grant determination is going to be based off, as you said, off of federal poverty tables, depending on what state you live in, and the size of the family. But it's also could be determined by a formula based on what that calculated SAI is, and subtracted that times a multiplier. That times a multiplier subtracted from the maximum Pell amount. That's how much you're going to get. So this is a big shift in terms of who's going to get Pell, how much are they going to get, and there are multiple ways to actually get to the same numbers. So this is a big change. This is something that folks are really it's gonna take a little bit to get your head around, and for folks to really understand.
So the old days of I think I can estimate what your Pell is going to look like is probably gone, right? For now,
I think it's gonna be more challenging. I think the hope is that folks will be able to somehow calculate it, whether it be the Department of Ed or a third party comes up with an estimator. But as of right now, it's not going to be as easy as it used to be.
I just remember, working with some folks across campus who would like to hand out estimates to prospective student athletes or music majors or whatever, and we think you have a zero, so you're going to get this full Pell, that kind of thing, and it's going to be difficult for them to do that. So I think an easy one, obviously, cost of attendance is going to be redefined a little bit. Take out EFC, put in SAI. Pretty much that's pretty much a given. But professional judgment now, doing the professional judgments has always been kind of a campus by campus thing, but there's a certain level of new transparency that they're putting into this that campuses are going to have to really promote and put it publicly available, how the professional judgment works. And talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's correct. So like you said, campuses they have to publicize what that process is, what it looks like. They actually have to accept it. Now, I know that sounds kind of foreign and people are like, well, what do you mean they have to accept it? In the past, schools could just blanket reject every professional judgment. That's no longer the case. They cannot do that. In addition, schools can use another school's professional judgment if they deem that appropriate. So they can do that. So there are definitely some changes. It's also a little bit of devil's in the details too. So used to we would refer to professional judgments as kind of a blanket statement. So now professional judgment or special circumstances, that's really defined to what we would consider financial considerations. So loss of a job, things like that. And then there are also unusual circumstances, which those would be things like parental estrangement, things of that nature, what most people would consider a dependency override. So even though, in the past we've used one blanket statement to really identify both, they're now separate pathways.
That's cool. And I think they're trying to look for clarity in what people were doing too, at the same time, when why they've done that. So, but the biggest change of all for 2024-25 is that October, the FAFSA will not be open. Alarms should be going off in your office right now. Everybody should be freaking out, running down the hallway. I could see Trisha Pangonis right now at Lake Erie College running down the hallway, just screaming, that kind of thing. Trisha, I hope you're watching. But it's not going to open until December, I think is the quote everybody's saying right now. So Ken, I'm going to ask you a question here in a second, but Ed, December is tough, right?
Yeah, it's tough for a couple of reasons. One, we're used to October 1st at this point. I mean, we've set up our cadence. And when I say we, I mean, it's not just the financial aid office, it's the campus community as a whole and beyond. So high schools, students, outreach groups, they've all set up their cadence based on an October 1 open date. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, the whole point of, I'm jumping in the Wayback Machine here with prior year was to get this out earlier. We've really, in a lot of ways, we've gone back to the old days. We've compressed that timeline again. And lastly, we don't know when, to your air quotes, Chris, we don't know when in December this is going to open up. It could be December 1st. It could be December 31st. We just don't know. So that's a whole different, that's a whole different thing that we have to worry about here.
And Kat, we'll talk about this in a second, but let's just give a little bit of a preview then. So if I don't get financial aid in October, November, what does that mean for our admissions folks? How does that really just kind of throw a little monkey wrench into our communication plans?
It throws a lot into it. And I'm going to layer on top of that this isn't just going to affect freshmen. Before, we used to really focus on our freshmen because it's the first time they're filling out that FAFSA. Well, everybody is going to have their first time filling out this FAFSA. So when we're thinking about communicating out to students, it's going to happen sooner and more intentional. And I think also it'll be really important to have that personal connection with your prospective students, with your current students. I think everyone on campus that has a frontline communication with a student needs to have some knowledge about the dates, what this means for filling it out. And it also means for your internal teams, what happens after holiday break and this just came out. You've lost all those months. So it's going to affect everybody, not just your freshmen, not just your internal teams. It's really going to make some changes.
And the one thing that just came to my mind too was the fact that when we measure KPIs, right? I think we'll talk about this in a couple of slides too, but when you measure KPIs, we've always been used to inquiries, applications, acceptances, deposits, right? Mr. Vice President, always want to know those funnel numbers. For the record, I worked for Ed for a couple of years. Every Monday morning, you wanted the numbers, and then when, how many FAFSAs did we have? How many financial aid packages are out? How many people have you talked to this week? Man, you were a slave driver. What are you hearing on the market, in the marketplace, that kind of thing. Those numbers that we've been typically getting in, November, December about FAFSA completion and things like that, not only for the incoming class, but also the returning class, because one of the major KPIs of whether a student is returning or not is if they have completed the next year's FAFSA. That's one of the biggest KPIs that is out there, is that if they're not giving you your money, if they're not telling you how much they've made or what their financial situation is, they're probably leaving or they're probably not enrolling. The phrase is "you've been fired" has been used a couple of times in the past too for that. So those measurements, you need to prepare your board, you need to prepare your president and the other VPs on campus who are looking at those numbers to see if you're going to be on track to hit specific things. So make sure that you guys are doing that. Let's just talk about some other big things you need to consider when you're on campus. Ed, do you have an institutional scholarship and aid deadline? Are we adjusting those deadlines? Do we need to adjust our deadlines? What is your take on that?
So I don't necessarily have a take on if you should or should not adjust those, but you need to be really, my opinion, you need to be really clear about what those are. I would also be transparent that we are or we are not. If you are, obviously let folks know that. But just be really clear about it, in my opinion. Folks, I think at this point, we're getting the word out that this timeline is compressed. The only way, well, I would advocate for updating it, changing it, if your current deadline is in December sometime. So just keep that in mind. That would be my take on it. But really, if you have one, make sure you're looking at it and having those internal conversations. What are we doing about this based on the fact that this is now opening 2+ months later? So
I think that's the other part as you get into it too, is, early action and early decision schools. Sometimes, and I know a lot of institutions will do this too, is that when you get accepted, they would like to give you a package that goes along with it. A lot of times they will have FAFSA information as part of that package, or at least give you your scholarship at that point in time, and maybe some need-based money that you might know about based upon that FAFSA information. So are you really in the early action, early decision? Do you currently have FAFSA information in your digital strategies? I think that's a huge one right now. Have you updated your communication flows? And Kat, we're going to talk about this in a second, but and Ed, to your point, if we are not increasing awareness of our prospective students and our current students about this whole process changing, it's not so much a lot of pressure on the student at that point in time. Can you imagine what your financial aid staff is going to be like when they've been used to having a longer period of time to process and to get that information to the prospective students and to the current students? Because a lot of colleges like to have their next year's financial aid packages out before May 1, before everybody leaves after graduation is over and the semester is over. Have that financial aid out there so you can start those payment plans in July, essentially, and have those conversations. So, having that digital strategy taken care of and making sure that that there's awareness across your campus. I think the other one is, how is the financial aid office, and I'm going to come to you, how's the financial aid office learning about housing right now and what we're hoping it could be?
Sure. So I know historically, when I was on the financial aid side of the desk, we would leverage what was on the FAFSA. There was a question on the FAFSA, and notice I'm saying past tense, that said, where are you living? What are your intentions on campus, off campus, commuting, and living with a parent? As of today, that question is no longer on the FAFSA for the 24-25 FAFSA. Now, there was significant pushback in that comment period for the FAFSA. So this is one that may reappear in the update, but gang, at this point, my opinion, you need to be having those conversations with the financial aid office, because this is going to drive things like cost of attendance. Which is going to drive what type of aid package they get, what type of aid, how much aid. And if folks are looking at those elements and making that a big part of their decision-making process, you really need to make sure that that's as accurate as possible. So if it's on there, if it gets back on there, I think that's a win for everyone involved. If not, how is it getting on there? How is that information being communicated to the financial aid office? Keeping in mind that you can't, per federal regulations, you can't have a supplemental application that would state something as simple as, hey, we need an email from you, prospective student, where are you living? That's considered a supplemental application for federal aid. That is against federal regulations. You can't do it. So you got to figure it out some other way.
So Kat, sometimes we would ask that on our regular application for admission, right? Are you going to commute? Are you going to live in housing? Do you want to be considered for financial aid? I mean, we've always asked all different kinds of questions, but the one thing that usually didn't happen was that information on the application for admission usually never really made it over to the folks in the financial aid office. What are some things that you think that admissions offices, if this does not happen, if we don't get the change that hopefully the Department of Ed is thinking about it, making that change back for us, what kinds of things do you think that we could be doing to help our institutions make that data swap?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have the ability to add questions to your application so that it's not a supplemental application that you're having people, so putting that back on there. Do you plan on using financial aid? Do you plan on requiring campus housing? Things like that. And then just making sure, I find that sometimes when you work in higher ed, we all become very siloed in our piece of the puzzle of getting that student to enrollment. So it'd be really important to just find out from that data on the application, how can we export it and get it to our financial aid teams so they can forecast what kind of how many students are going to be requiring housing, or maybe that can even indicate how many FAFSAs might need to come in. And then you can start planning what that processing and packaging would have to look like to move forward. So we just have to really work together a little bit more, especially this year, so that we can kind of help on the front end while we wait for these next pieces.
I think the word you used is forecast. And I think that's one thing that I totally forgot to think about. Can you imagine what the CFO is thinking right now? They don't know how much aid is going to be rolling out in October and November. They're going to have to wait till February, March to understand that, and what kind of budgeting issue that could be, putting the constraints on it. And wow. Yeah. Okay. CFOs, good to know. Here's a big one, Ed, and you and I talked about it earlier too, about packaging, right? So the SAI can be as low as minus 1,500 or something like that, all the way up through whatever. A zero EFC is not the same as a zero EFC or a zero SAI anymore. What are you hearing anyway in the marketplace about people readjusting their packaging policy? Or they're just kind of waiting to see what it's going to look like on the matrix and then try to adjust from there?
So I think there are a couple of things in play here. So just so folks are clear, yes, Christy, you're absolutely right. There can be a negative SAI down to negative 1,500 at this point. This does not mean students are eligible for additional aid. What that really means is the Department of Ed is using that as a means to communicate to colleges and universities that, hey, these are incredibly high need students. These are students that probably need additional touch points. They need additional assistance pretty much across the board. Now, with that being said, when you model that out, that whole formula has changed. So NASFA, so the Financial Aid Association, does have an institutional modeling tool out there. If your institution is not aware of that, or you haven't utilized it, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at that. That's really going to inform what you're going to need to do in terms of need-based institutional funding. Chris, to your point about CFOs, about discount rates, all of those things, that's really going to help inform you. And, I actually spoke to someone a couple of weeks ago, you may want to take your whole funnel from last year to give you an idea as to what's that look like, not just for the students who came, but the students who didn't come. How is this going to impact the folks that didn't come? And maybe that changes because all of a sudden they're getting more aid, or you're going to have to adjust your institutional methodology based on, potential additional funding. So,
well, I think the other piece of it too is that your existing students are going to have this mindset change too. So if you change your basic packaging policy based upon the new scores, especially from a need-based aid perspective, you're talking about a change there too. And how are you going to communicate that? I remember talking with some friends who had done a tuition rate cut. And the reason why they were so good at being able to do this, because they really literally almost sat down with every single current student, said, you're going to lose aid, but you're also losing cost of attendance. And they really showed them what that's going to look like. Being intentional on your communication with current students is going to be just as important as it is with prospective students. And we go from there. So we talk about students and families. I think, Kat, we work on the admissions side. We work on the front. Nice capture logo there. That's nice. I like that.
Well,
for those of you out there who want
marketing.
one, if you want one, just message Kat and she'll send you one. But we still have a hard time with juggling dates and juggling deadlines with prospective students, because they're looking at 7 or 8 different schools and everybody's a little bit different. And now we're going to change up this FAFSA thing, and these deadlines and these dates are going to be moving, that kind of thing. How do we help those families get through that? What are some things that we should be doing with our families?
We do really need to get very intentional. I think that something that often happens is that we can start to over communicate. So we kind of need to think about what typically goes out about FAFSA, what typically goes out about early admission or early app, and how are all of those pieces going to come into play. One thing that I always remember is we'd have students that would fill out an early application that came out in October and thought that that was somehow also connected to them having filled out the FAFSA. So now months later, they're finding out that they did not do that step rather than catching it sooner. So we really need to make sure that we're communicating, like I said, to returning students, because it's going to be a very different situation for them this year and our freshmen. So making sure that we're really taking those communication plans and saying, what do they need to know now? How can I keep them engaged while we wait for this to come out? How can I prepare my students to be ready so that the second that they deploy that FAFSA, if it's December 31st, they're like, cool, well, my school already helped me know what I would need to know. So we really need to make sure that we're being intentional so that nothing gets convoluted in the conversation, and we can just prepare people on the front end, and it's going to help our teams on the back end as well.
Right. And Ed, they're adding some other things here too, that we haven't had to use in the past, like multi-factor authentication. They won't be able to see what they're putting on the FAFSA anymore. So remember when I was young, the financial aid was done on paper at the kitchen table. I don't understand why you're laughing. This is not right. But thank you, David Rhodes, wherever you are in the world, for helping us do my first FAFSA ever. I am ever grateful for you for that. But being able to do that, and then we were able to suck in the tax information. I remember this was revolutionary. We weren't going to have to do this paper stuff anymore. We were going to do paperwork for certain things, but we weren't going to do the FAFSA. But now we're going to do the tax information, but you're not going to see it. So what kind of repercussions are we talking about with that, Ed? I mean, I can't see it, but my life has changed. We've already kind of talked about housing, but my life has changed. I need to know what my taxes are for this past year, right? Prior year. And I need to kind of know what my taxes are for this year so I can get that professional judgment or whatever I need to do on that change, right?
Yeah, this one is definitely a big change. Now, as you alluded, Chris, it used to be the IRS data exchange where there was a validation of information within the FAFSA. You physically went out to the IRS, you were redirected to the IRS website, you saw the information, you transferred it over, you could still see it on the FAFSA.
Right.
Now, and this is a big part of the simplification that's really is going to make it easier for students and families. It is simply a checkbox on the FAFSA that says, I authorize the Department of Education to retrieve my information from the IRS. This was codified in, I believe, the Futures Act. So it's in the law. It's there, and it's meant to help students. And I think it will. I absolutely think it will. But the challenge is, kind of to your point, Chris, if their financial situation has changed, they will not be able to see that information on the FAFSA because it's all happening behind the scenes. It will not populate anywhere on the FAFSA, not for the student, not for the parents. So it's really, that onus is really going to be on the student and the family to still know their situation and know if the financial information that they're pulling over is different from what it is currently. And would that qualify you for some type of professional judgment, special circumstances?
Right. I think that's the big thing, and we're talking about repercussions for the colleges, timeline to yield just got a little bit longer and shorter at the same time, right? And we're talking about your admissions counselors more than ever. And Kat, we're going to talk to you about that in a minute, but building that affinity starting now, not only just the seniors, but let's talk about juniors and sophomores too, as they're going through this process. And traditional melt, which happened over several months, because, financial aid come out in November, people would figure out where they want to go, December, January. Now they're not going to know what they're going to get financially until February at the earliest. Okay. So timelines are going to change. And again, back to the benchmarks, you have to educate your campus as an enrollment leader about what the benchmarks are and do that. So Kat, you're the solutions person for us. So let's talk about how we overcome everything. So you had mentioned before, communicate early and often. So what are we communicating and what's that mean?
So are you changing your deadlines? What are they going to be? Are you not changing your deadlines? Are you having any kind of events that people can get some help with? Just you have to let your students know what's going to be happening, because at the end of the day, we know the application came out in October every other year, but we still had students that called us on January 2nd. They're like, oh crap, I didn't do my FAFSA yet. So we always will have those students. That is not going to change. So we have to make sure that we know internally what can we do? Can we move those deadlines, or do we not have the capacity? So either way, we need to let the people that are filling out the FAFSA know what they have to do to help us as well. So really making sure that we're getting the word out there in many different ways.
Yeah, I think, and you just said many different ways. So let's talk about multi-channel approach. We can put it on the website. We're going to talk about that in a second, but what other types of channels should we be doing? And not just obviously for kids, but for mom and dad too.
Exactly. So we know that there's a lot that students do, but the muscle is coming from the parents to a lot of these, especially with our incoming freshmen. So we can use digital strategies. We can make our reach further. We can segment audiences just to make sure that the parents are getting the information they need and students are getting the information they need. So making sure your website is up to date. If you're using digital strategies, making sure that it's redirecting your students to the correct place on your website. If you still like to do paper mail, what is that going to look like and how do you want to plan for it? But we need to make sure not everyone's reading email. Not everyone's perusing the web on a desktop computer where they're going to see a digital ad correctly. So we need to be really thinking about how we reach our population of students and how to best do that.
Yeah, you mentioned planning special events, and I know that you had done some special events back in the, prior to Capture years. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I think this is a really big one because we know that our students, our incoming students right now, are all about that personal connection, feeling that they culturally fit on the campus that they're choosing, all of those things. So get them there. Plan events on your campus. We used to do one every year called FAFSA Frenzy, and financial aid would come to that. We would be in a computer lab. We had snacks and drinks, and parents and families got to come. So students are meeting students, and parents can sit down on a computer, fill out that FAFSA, and if they need help, you raise your hand, and someone can come right over and help. When people left at the end of that 2-3 hours that we had that night, we had so many applications. We are able to forecast. So, maybe it's not FAFSA Frenzy in October, but you could still do that event where you're getting a bulk of applications in one to kind of, fast forward through waiting for those to come in. So really thinking about how you can get people involved and to do it in the moment. And if you can't get people on campus, you have Zoom with breakout rooms, but you really want to get people involved and try to, as my grandfather would say, keep your poop in a group and just get them taken care of. So.
No, and I think that's a good point. It's not, there's not going to be an Oktoberfest anymore, right? Can't do Oktoberfest, but can you do s'mores in January?
Yeah.
To get your FAFSAs done, those kinds of things. Consider, try to work your way through the Christmas holiday kind of situation and get yourself over that thing. And obviously planning ahead, I think that goes without saying. We need to keep planning ahead. And if you're not planning now, you need to start. You're probably a little bit behind on everything else. So this is kind of what it looks like, gang. This is what an omni-channel, multi-channel engagement looks like. So we're buying names in May. We need to start pushing out our comm flows right now, talking about our deadlines. We need to be talking about what's next. We need to talk about financial aid, value statements, those kinds of things too. But it gets you all the way to May 1. And what it really looks like is this. So when we talk about the timeline, when we look at summer and fall right now, financial aid comm flow is going to have to extend. Okay, we're going to talk about deadlines, but we need to also push our net price calculators. We need to meet with your counselor, create that affinity, work together on that. Get your FSA IDs done. Both mom and dad have to have one now. Gather your FAFSA information. If there's anything out there that there was a change in the year, make sure you have that. Make sure your prospective students know that. But have a social media countdown, have a cadence in your social media as well. And then again, always having those special deadlines. Now, Kat, when it comes to December, it's time to push for that FAFSA. We are focused in right after Thanksgiving. We're going to, I hate to use the word punish, but we are just going to break the bank on making sure that students and prospective students know and understand that once that FAFSA opens, it's time to finish that. Can you speak to the need to build those relationships, not only with your prospective students, but even your current students too? Because a lot of times students will come to campus and they just melt in and you don't see them. But making sure those relationships are sustained. How do we do that?
I think one good point to state too is that your students are coming to you and they don't always know what they need to ask. They know they need help, but they don't even know what to ask or how to ask it. So going back to Ed said a little bit ago, we had it on one of the PowerPoints that you need to make sure that anyone that your students are getting to know enough to help guide that student. So, your admissions counselors might have to hinder or hold on to that relationship just a little bit longer, have some more touch points throughout that December period. Know what questions to ask. Has anything changed since you filled out your last FAFSA? What questions are okay to ask if you're not a financial aid counselor that will also help your financial aid team. And then just making sure you have those intentional touch points a little bit further out than you might typically do with your prospective incoming students. And still checking on, maybe advisors need to be checking on current students and asking those kind of questions. So figuring out what department can help with that piece of the puzzle.
Right. I think in the next part, Ed, is something that you and I actually did really well together while working together. Is we came up and we had crunch time, right? FAFSAs came out, and then it was our counselors' time to shine, right? So our counselors, and Kat, you're aware of this too, even more value statement kinds of conversations. We're going to review those packages and those awards with people, work with your, you have to have admissions working with financial aid. If your admissions counselors can't explain a financial aid package, you're behind. You need to make sure it's almost in the other way too. If your financial aid staff can't say, well, we have a great business program and here's why. Kind of that cross training that needs to happen on several campuses so that you're providing that value statement along the way. But you're going to have to bring in your alumni and your influencers through your social media campaigns as well, pushing that they want to become part of their campus, those kinds of things as well. Ed, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the issues that we're going to run into? Because if we get FAFSAs in December, opens up in December, we're going to start downloading sometime mid to late January, packages probably February. What kind of time crunch are we talking here if we're going to use May 1 still as our deadline, if you want to use that?
Right. I mean, that time crunch is going to be tremendous. I mean, just think, folks, historically, since we went to prior, most of the times you would have those software updates from your information system in place, usually by early to mid-November. So we're losing, I mean, if we think about early February, we're losing, what is that, 3 months, 4 months? This is tremendous. So, I mean, everything Chris had said previously about maintaining those lines of communication with prospective students, it's huge. Making sure that folks on both sides, when I say both sides, admissions and financial aid, are communicating and to an extent cross-trained. Now, I know oftentimes people hear financial aid and cross-trained and they get really antsy. They get really anxious. I'm not talking about knowing federal regulations. I'm talking about, to what Chris's point, do they know how to read and understand a financial aid offer? Can they explain just the basics of that? And also, again, to just reiterate, the financial aid staff, can they speak at high level about programs, about admissions policies, being able to reinforce that value proposition? Those are all so important with this compressed timeline. When you're looking at, maybe 3 months until May 1, that's huge. That's huge.
I think the other part too is I think when we start to, and we're going to start to wrap up here, those lines of communication, you can start easily right now. Your website is your #1 recruiter right now. Those students are out there, but are you thinking about where they're visiting? Are you able to track where they're visiting besides visitors to the homepage or visitors to here? Who is going to those different pages? We're going to talk about that here in a second, but homepage messaging. pop-ups, their kind of thing? Is it a new way to go ahead and put messaging on your homepage? Update your admissions page, your financial aid page, your student accounts page, current student page, parent pages. If you don't have parent pages, you need to get parent pages as well now. These are easy updates to make, especially for deadlines and for processes, so that everybody is well aware of it. And you can track who's visiting those places as well. Kat, I want to talk a little bit about dynamic content on the website, because that's something that we do through our marketing automation platform, Engage. Having a specific piece of information pop up, and why don't you let's just stop this. Tell me what dynamic content is before I really just go down a rabbit hole. Keep it concise.
So dynamic content, it's dynamic. So typically that comes in the form of a toaster or a popover. Toaster, easy to remember because it pops up out of any corner of your screen, just like a piece of toast, where a popover takes over the screen, which typically kind of teases out engagement a little bit better. So what we can do here at Capture is segment out students. So we could say this one is have questions about paying for college. We could say anonymous visitors and accepted students that have visited the financial aid page at least 2 times is going to be served this piece of content. They might need some help. So click this button and I'm going to connect you with a financial aid advisor. So we can really start to tailor where people are landing on, where they're getting stuck, and use those pieces to push this messaging out. And then we have a reporting on the back end to say, hey, these are all the students that were interested in the fact that they needed to meet a counselor. So then you also have that reporting so that your admissions counselors can check in and say, hey, Chris, I know that you had some questions about financial aid. I just wanted to make sure that you got in contact with a financial aid officer. Is anything else kind of lingering in your mind? So dynamic content really allows you to target the right student in the right funnel stage and put some muscle to your team that's already a little bogged down to move them along the funnel. What are my next steps? Meet my counselors, all of those pieces.
I think that's the other part is, and you kind of alluded to it, what's that next step? So as we look at that dynamic content, Kat, we can move people along through that process because we know where they are in the process because of the bi-directional information that we get from like a Slate or Salesforce, that kind of thing that we have set up. So we kind of have an idea of where that student is with that. So how does that end up working? Is once as we get through that, then it's all rules based, right, Kat? Everything's rules based.
Yeah, so we can just set up rules. Who are you trying to target? When should we be targeting them even? So we can really dial it down. And then we also have the ability to segment out these audiences and deliver the specific students to the admissions counselor and say, hey, Chris, 12 of your students saw the Future Duke today and clicked into it. Just make sure that they understood how to get started. Right. So really being able to communicate to the right person at the right time, I think will especially help while we're in this flux to December. We can utilize dynamic content to keep people engaged and warm as they continue on in the funnel.
I think that's a good point. We can keep them warm and moving through. And, email is still a good thing, right, Kat? We're still sending out
absolutely
billions and billions, not just us, but everybody in the world is sending out billions of emails a day. And it's getting read. It might not be what you want or anything else like that, but people are popping in and out of email.
Absolutely. And to think about it, you got to think about the different populations and how they like to read their information. Parents are still very apt to open their email and read about what's going to be happening to their students as they enter college. So as you can see here, we have a great readership on this parent campaign, getting the information directly to the person that's going to push little Johnny to fill out that application and pursue school. So email is still a really great way, and we can follow the clicks there. So what I love about that is you push an email out and you can see that Chris read it. So Chris knows this information, and now as a counselor, I know I need to take him to that step 2, but it still helps kind of, again, put that little bit of work behind our teams that are going to be a little bogged down over this next period.
Yeah, when they're working with, especially on the private institutions, when you have a smaller staff and you're working with 500 or 600 applications of your own, knowing who is interacting and being able to spend that proper time in that area is a big deal.
And you can see
thanks, guys. What's it? Yeah, exactly. So I would just real quick, guys, thanks for helping out today. Here's the last question for everybody. Gang, it's at the end of May is here. Let's just call it what it is. It's June 1. How do you feel about your incoming class? Let's hear that. Let's everybody reach in and tell us, are you ahead of schedule? Are you on target? Worried about melt? We're a little behind, but we're not concerned. We're going to make budget, or we're behind in all areas and we're still looking for answers. And I think looking at some chat forums that I'm on and talking with some friends, it's a little bit all over the place. So Kat, are you hearing the same thing from your friends?
Yeah. And, I religiously read it Inside Higher Ed every morning. And so this is it's a constant conversation, whether, community colleges are going to come out ahead or is it going to be private institutions? It's very much in flux right now. So it's a gamble. I feel like and now it's going to be harder to kind of follow those numbers a little bit. So.
Exactly. All right, Emma, let's see the results. I don't understand why hosts and panelists can't vote.
I know, I felt rude, right?
That's kind of rude, Emma.
I want to vote.
So we're on target so far. About 50% are on target right now. A couple are a little behind, but that's okay. I think that's a really good sign. Everybody's working hard. I know that's the big thing. Everybody's really working hard. And as you go through this process, don't ever forget to call your friends and ask for help. Not everybody's your competition. So here's some takeaways. Your FAFSA changes are going to impact your families and your teams. So everything from your students, your prospective students, your current students, but also your team on campus with your financial aid office and your admissions teams together. Provide strong financial aid messaging across many channels. I can't tell you enough, as someone who works in the space, it's a multi-channel approach. You have to do print, you have to do social, you have to do organic, you've got to do digital, you've got to send email, you've got to knock on their door at the residence hall, whatever it takes to we've done that, to get that FAFSA done, so that you can get that student through the next process. I think sometimes students forget that they need to do certain things because mom and dad aren't around. And lastly, connect with relevant messages based on your behavior. If you are able to measure behavior of what a student is doing, you can really have an effect on them by providing them with the right message at the right time, not just giant blanket statements all the time, but really personalized messages. And that's what Gen Z is actually really wanting right now. So Capture's on the road, gang. We are on the road this coming week. We are headed to Slate Summit in Nashville. So if you're headed to Slate, we'll love to see you there. And then if you're headed to the New York ACAC there at St. Bonaventure, my good friend Bob Sirku will be there as well. So Kat and Ed, thank you so very much for hanging out today. Really appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time. Everybody have a great, safe summer if we don't see you beforehand. Take good care.